Hello everybody and welcome to this Easy 11 Plus live lesson on multiple choice comprehension. These lessons are every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, apart from this week because of the football last night. And it's really great to see you. As always, the worksheet for today's lesson is in the video description, which is down here on YouTube and up here on Facebook. And there are also lots of other useful links to various resources, including free things. So do take a moment at some point to look through the links in the description. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe and click the bell button if you can see it. And that's about it. Big welcome to people from the various Facebook groups, of course, the 11 Plus Journey, the Cadwalder Quests, 11 Plus Creative Writing Group, and the Independent School 11 Plus Group. Right, enough of all that. Let's get started. So we can see the text over here, which you've no doubt read. If you haven't read the text yet, if you haven't done the questions, I strongly recommend pausing this, having a go at the questions, and then coming back to watch the rest of the video. You'll get much more out of it that way. We're not going to read through the whole passage together because it's quite long. I'm going to assume that you've already read it. Let's jump straight in to looking at the answers. Now, I've already done a lesson on multiple choice comprehension. In fact, it was the very first Easy 11 Plus video that I did. So I'm not going to go through the basic technique quite as thoroughly as I did in that video. And I'd really recommend that if you want some basics of multiple choice technique, that you go back to that video, which is Easy 11 Plus number 1, and have a look at that sometime soon. And that should help as well. Okay, so starting from the top. Which of these statements about the Liverpool and Manchester Railway is definitely not correct based on the information in the passage? So reading this question, you should zero in on the word not. And I would always, good start that my pen isn't picking up on the screen. Hang on a second, here we are, okay. Just kind of left it sitting around for too long. So not is absolutely crucial here. It'd be really easy to plunge in and look for the things that are right. And then, of course, you'll get the answer completely wrong. This is basic, but it's the kind of mistake that anybody can make, including me, if you don't concentrate and just do the steps. So let's just skim the options here, because that will help us to see which part of the passage we need to look at. So horses were not used to tow vehicles on the railway. The railway ran from Manchester to Liverpool. The railway won competition. It was revolutionary in the development of transport. The railway is not initially planned for use by steam locomotives. So this is all to do with the kind of background of what the railway is about. And if we look at the passage, we can see that all this stuff is really to do with this section here. And this kind of writing on the side to highlight where you're looking for particular bits of information is really important. Mons Bat has asked in a question, why did you circle not? Because the question says which of these is definitely not correct. If you read the question too quickly and didn't concentrate on the details, you might ask which thing is definitely correct, and then you get the wrong answer. So it's really important that you identify and highlight keywords like that so you don't do completely the opposite thing. Right, back to the passage. So, rocket is famous as a revolutionary design in the history of transport. Now, I don't think the space on the screen for me to show you the text and the options here. So I'm going to be flicking between them quite a lot here. I hope it doesn't get too confusing. So horses were not used to tow vehicles on the railway. And we can see that it says lines 7, 8, that this was the first line, not to use horses for towing at any point along its length. So this definitely is correct, which of course means it can't be the answer because we need the thing that is not correct. The railway ran from Manchester to Liverpool, it's the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. So although the passage doesn't explicitly say it ran from Manchester to Liverpool, that is very likely to be true based on what we know. And certainly we can't reasonably say that it's definitely not correct. So I think we'll put that as a correct option. The railway won the competition to use rocket as a locomotive. So where does it refer to the competition here? Well, we can see that it was the prototype which won the 1829 competition, so it looks very promising, for steam locomotives to power the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. So it was the railway company that set up the competition to find the right locomotives. So this option here is really an upside down version of the truth. It's completely flipped over. In other words, it's not true. So this is almost certainly going to be our answer. let's quickly check the others. It was revolutionary in the development of transport. It says lines 1 to 2, it was revolutionary design in the history of transport, so that's definitely true. It was not initially planned for use by steam locomotives, now just my question here is, does it answer this in that very first section? Which won the competition for steam locomotives? Okay, so it looks here as though this is an option, as though it's not initially planned for use by steam locomotives, is also incorrect, because line 4 to 5 says it was competition for steam locomotives. However, if we skip down to lines 15 to 18, we see that the management initially intended to install fixed steam engines. That means engines in one place, like a building, which would draw cables along the railway, which would pull wagons attached to them. So there's quite a lot of work out there, but you can see it wasn't initially, that means in the first place, planned for steam locomotives. So in fact, that one is not correct. That one is correct. It was not initially planned for use by steam locomotives, which mean things driving along and pulling carriages. So we're left with option C as being the only one which is plain wrong. The railway did not win the competition, it was the railway who set the competition. That's a bit like saying the examiner did really well in the exam. No, the student did really well in the examiner set and marked the exam. Okay, so if you remember from that first video on multiple choice comprehension, you need to go through systematically, option by option, considering them all, and weighing each option against, I need to show the answers here, weighing each option against the passage. If an answer jumps out as being obviously the right one, still check the other possibilities, because you never know, you might have fallen into the examiner's traps. And multiple choice tests often involve various kinds of trap. Right, onwards. Choose a statement about rocket which is most accurate. I should say, by the way, I've written which here. It should actually be that. And there's a really pedantic grammatical reason for that. It isn't particularly important. I won't explain it now. Quite a lot of my early papers misuse which and that because it wasn't something I was so secure in at that point, and I looked it up afterwards and improved my English. So it is never too late to make your English even better and more accurate and communicative. It isn't really very important, the difference between which and that, but if you want to have really precise English, it's worth looking up and not making the mistake that I have made here. Anyway, be that as it may, choose the statement which is most accurate. Rocket was the first locomotive, Rocket was the first steam locomotive, Rocket was the first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages, and so on and so forth. So what exactly was Rocket? What was its purpose? Was it a steam locomotive? So we now need to look for that kind of information in the passage. And one of the real tests with a multiple choice comprehension task like this is to zero in on the right place which has the relevant information. So we can see if we look at lines 4 and 6, competition for steam locomotives. Look. Therefore, while by no means the first steam locomotive, Rocket can claim to have been the first fully operational locomotive in the modern sense. Let's go back to the options and see whether this helps us to rule out or favour any of them. So we need the one which is most accurate, so it's not a negative, we're looking for the right answer that matches the passage. Rocket was the first locomotive. Well, 10 to 11 we just read say Rocket was by no means the first steam locomotive. So it wasn't even the first steam locomotive, so it certainly wasn't the first locomotive, so you can get rid of both of those. Okay, now the next three options all consider that it was the first steam locomotive to do something or other. First steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages. Okay, the first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages along a railway's entire length. The first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages and horses along railways' entire length. Let's look back at the text. By the way, this is one of the reasons I really recommend printing out the worksheet before a lesson, because sometimes it's useful to be able to see more than one thing at the same time in front of you on the desk, whereas I can only show you one thing on a screen at a time unless I'm going to make it really tiny and cramped. And I know some people even watch this on their phones, so that just wouldn't be a possibility. Anyway, Rocket was the first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages. Well, Rocket was going to be for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and it was going to be the first modern railway, which would be the first line not to use horses for towing at any point along its length. So when we see in the answers that this was a first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages and horses along, that's irrelevant. It's not about pulling horses. You have to misunderstand what the word horse is doing there. We aren't given anything to confirm it, but also it's to do with misunderstanding the passage. Rocket was the first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages. Maybe. But we know it wasn't the first steam locomotive because it says 10 to 11. It was by no means the first steam locomotive. And we just aren't given the information about whether it was the first one to pull any passenger carriages. Was it the first steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages along a railway's entire length? Yes, because this was the first railway not to use horses anywhere. So therefore the first locomotive on it must also have been the first one to have pulled people along its entire length without horses. If you put those bits of information together, it was the first railway to use the locomotive for the whole length. This was the first steam locomotive on it, so it must be the first steam locomotive to do that. It's a kind of syllogistic reasoning, and if you know what that means, I'm very impressed. Otherwise, you can look it up. So let's go back to the option here. First steam locomotive to pull passenger carriages along a railway's entire length. You'll see that with these questions, you have to do a bar in the box that you're choosing. That's the format for this kind of exam that I've set up here. You'll also see in the paper that there's a page where you can actually fill in the options for each question on a kind of big answer grid altogether. There are lots of different formats and exams. This is the one we're using here. Just get used to adapting to whatever's put in front of you. Always read the exam instructions thoroughly. On to the next question. What was the original idea for the railway? Now, as often happens, in finding the information for one question, you help yourself to find the answer to another. And that's what's happened here. So if we go back to the text, we can see we've already spoken about lines sort of 15 to 20, which are down in this part of the world. The railway management had intended to install fixed steam engines which would draw cables along the railway. Now that takes a lot of imagining, but if you just think about the words, you should be able to work this out. What does fixed mean? It means in one place, not moving. So we got steam engines that do not move. They draw cables, and you know that draw can mean pull. And then it says wagons would be hooked to the cables and dragged along the tracks in this area down here. Okay. And they had intended this. However, various things happened and they ended up choosing locomotives instead. We'll get to that in a bit. Let's go back to the options. So what was the original idea? Carriages would be pulled by a cable. Yes, that's correct. Locomotives would be powered remotely. What does that mean? That means there's some kind of power elsewhere that makes a locomotive move. No, that doesn't really make sense. The passage is clear. The cable will pull wagons. There aren't any locomotives, any what you might call steam engines driving along and pulling the carriages. So the language here is a bit difficult, but you should be able to work out that that isn't quite right. Locomotives would drive along the tracks, pulling cables with wagons attached to them. No, because the word fixed, they are fixed steam engines, which means they stay in one place. That was the original idea. So that's definitely not correct. Steam power would not be used. Definitely not correct. It says steam engines. Trains would be drawn by horses for part of the journey, and you'll remember clearly enough without me going back to the passage. This was going to be it was going to be a railway where they would have cables drawing the wagons all the way along the tracks. There's no mention of horses being involved here. So we're left very simply with option A. Quite an easy one, that, if you concentrate on the railway management had intended to install fixed steam engines which would draw cables which wagons would be hooked onto. So it's just about close reading. There is no vocabulary in there, I think, that you won't know, but you have to concentrate on it and not be tricked by words like steam engine and so on into thinking we're talking about locomotives chugging along the track. Okay, brilliant. On to the next one. By the way, I'm not planning to do the entire paper in this lesson because there are 50 questions there and we'd be at it for a good couple of hours. What I'm planning to do today is get a certain distance through the paper, maybe do the first 15, 20 questions depending how we go, and then come back and do the other ones, perhaps do it for next week's lesson or do a video in the meantime. I haven't quite decided, but I think we might come back and work on the rest of the same questions next Tuesday. But you'll find out about that. I'll send you an email or whatever. Oh, by the way, if you want to get my emails about these lessons and that kind of thing, you need to get onto the RSL Educational mailing list. And the easiest way to do that, there's a link in the video description for my free resource pack, which I email out. If you sign up for the free resources, that also puts you onto my mailing list, cunningly, and then you'll find out about my worksheets and lessons and so on. So that might be worth doing. I should probably mention that most lessons, actually, because it's probably useful for some people. And that way you'll get the worksheets emailed in advance and you'll know when I do something like changing the day of the lesson and that kind of thing. Anyway, onwards. So, which two of the following reasons did George Stephenson give for using travelling locomotives on the railway? Okay, so where is this discussed in the passage? So the engineer George Stephenson argued strongly that travelling locomotives would be more efficient while also making operation of the line more flexible. Okay, so we've got two very clear meanings there. Now we need to match them up with the answers. More efficient and operation would be more flexible. Okay, remember those things. So they would enable trains to be run when they were needed. So that's really matches more flexible very well. It would make operation of the line more flexible. What does it mean if you can be more flexible when you're operating a train service? It means that you can run more trains when you need them and fewer trains when you don't need them. So for example, if you're talking about a metro train service into a city, you need to run more trains between about 7 and 9 in the morning and about 4 and 7 in the evening when people are commuting to and from work, and you need to run fewer trains at other times of day. That's about being able to operate flexibly. If you've got just cables being pulled along the tracks, pulling wagons round and round and round, it's harder to have that kind of flexibility. Flexibility also means you can say, we need a train today, but we don't normally run for this particular load, and you can arrange it if you've got enough motivation and money. Anyway, waffly there, but the point is that one very clearly matches flexible. Okay, we got that. They will enable the track to be bent or rerouted. I'm going with Jonathan Wass there. Rerouted more easily. That's clearly trying to trick you with a misunderstanding of what flexible means here. Flexible doesn't mean you can bend the track around. I mean, how would you do that? How would you bend a railway track? Here. But hang on a second, because this question has got two parts. We've got this stuff here, and we've got this stuff down here. This might be a moment to have a think about the options down below, because we have already decided that one is almost certainly right. We can be really pretty definite about that. That matches flexible so well. Now, if we look at the bottom, there are only two options that include option 1, which means that the answer isn't likely to be any of these. Notice I haven't done this, by the way, because then I'm putting bars in those boxes, and let's say that a computer marks this, it might get confused. So just be careful. If you've got a bar, a box or something, do not write anything in any box apart from the box that is your answer. Worth bearing in mind. Anyway, we've only got two options here that might be the answer. 1 and 3 and 1 and 5. So that means we only need to bother with 3 and 5. One of those is the right answer, and one of those is not. If we're right about one, but I think we can be pretty confident about that. So, they would be faster or they would cost less to run. So now we go back to the passage. Notice I'm always going to the text, to the passage, to the passage, to the text. This is the kind of thought process you need to get going. You may be thinking, people always ask me this when I'm talking about multiple choice technique. They say, but doesn't this take ages when you do it in an exam? No, it takes ages now when you're thinking through every tiny step and you're not used to the technique, or when you've got to explain it to people as I'm doing. Once you're used to it, this really systematic way of going text, passage, passage, text, just flicking to and fro, can be really quick, and it saves you time because you don't have all that time thinking, help, what's the answer? What do I do? I don't know. I'm going to read the passage again. You just do the technique and the answer pops out. Right. They'd be faster or they'd cost less to run. So we have got here, George Stephenson argued, can't talk today, that travelling locomotives would be more efficient and they'd be more flexible. We've dealt with more flexible, so they would be more efficient. Does more efficient mean faster, or does it mean cost less to run? Well, efficiency can be to do with speed. So let's say, for example, you need less fuel to produce the same speed. That is a kind of efficiency. But it doesn't mean faster. More efficient does not mean faster. Whereas more efficient can mean cost less. What would be a good example of this? You might say, when we're going on holiday, we could fly to Canada and then change the plane and then fly down to Rio. Imagine a holiday in Rio. Unbelievable these days, but that would be fantastic, if only. But you might say, but that wouldn't be very cost efficient because you've got to pay for 2 very long flights. You might say it would be more efficient just to fly straight to Rio. That's an example. So efficient can mean costing less to run. So anyway, 5 matches well. So going back to the answers, losing track of what I'm doing. 1 and 5 go well, so that leads us to option E. So think about the system that saved us a bit of effort there. Once we were certain that 1 was right, we could get rid of all the options down here that didn't involve 1. And then we knew we had to choose between 3 and 5, and 2 and 4 weren't actually relevant. Great. Flying onwards at a not that impressive speed, a bit like Rocket that went at the magnificent speed of 30 miles an hour. You can do that on a bicycle on a steep downhill, but it was very impressive at the time, especially when you were pulling enormous weight of carriages. What was George Stephenson's connection to Rocket? He was the train driver, he opposed it, the Stephenson family company built it, the son was the sole designer, he was not directly connected to Rocket. This is the kind of really specific question that's probably going to have an answer at a pretty specific point in the passage. I hate saying the word specific, it's so difficult. Anyway, it's probably easy for you. Okay, so looking down here in the text, we can see that entrance included Rocket, built by the Stephenson family's own company and designed primarily by George Stephenson's son, Robert. Okay, so it was built by the family's company and it was designed by Stephenson's son, Robert. Bit of a conflict of interest here that George Stephenson was seems to have been heavily involved in forming the plans for the railway and what kind of locomotives they'd use, and his family was also entering the competition to get their locomotive used on the railway and make a ton of money. Sounds like politics. Anyway, let's go back to the answers. So the answer gives the option. He was the train driver. The passage doesn't tell us who the train driver was, but that's clearly not what it's getting at here. We don't actually know, but come on, that's wrong. He opposed it. How could he oppose it? It was his train, or his locomotive, or his family's anyway. Absolutely not. The Stephenson family company built it. Okay, that's right. His son was the sole designer. Oh, that's tempting. So we're not sure. We need to check the passage again. Never be ashamed to check the passage. People who check the passage get the best marks. It was designed primarily by George Stephenson's son, Robert. What does primarily? It means mostly, before everybody else. Not, that's not the one, you're on my face. Not that he was the sole designer, he was the primary, the first designer. So that's actually wrong. He was not directly connected to Rocket. No, the passage is telling us that he was. So we're left very clearly with C. Now, look, if you're doing this really in an exam, C is so obviously the right answer if you've read the passage that you might actually just go straight in and select option C. However, when you've selected it, at least take the time to check the other options and just make sure that there isn't a better possibility in there, that you haven't been tricked. It is always worth the effort because tricks abound in multiple choice comprehension tests. It's a bit like reasoning tests and so on. Great. Okay. We're not getting through this at a great rate, but the main thing is to teach the technique. At the end of the day, the answers are in the paper. You can check the answers yourself. The main thing is that we go through it at a pace where I can really show you the technique very clearly, because this exercise isn't going to come up in an exam unless they copy my resources, which I'm sure they won't do. Actually, people have in the past, but very bad. But it's not going to come up in a real 11 plus test. The point here is that you learn the skills. What am I doing? I'm waffling on. I'm starting to get too hot. I'm going to turn the fan on in a second. Then there might be a little bit of background noise, but I'm sure you'll survive. Which of the following things were the Rainhill trials not designed to test? It's a not question. Okay? Careful. Look out for the word not, because that means you are not going to select the thing which is the correct option here. You're looking for the incorrect one. So far as you can tell from the passage, that was a big parenthesis in brackets. Let's go on to the next page, because we haven't got on to learning much about the trials yet. Okay. What have we learnt already, actually? Let's check back a second. So the trials were to find the best locomotive design, and that's all we learn about there, apart from the fact there are going to be various tests. Best, various tests, that's not much information. Okay. And then we go on. Prototypes included cycloped, a locomotive built around a horse on a treadmill, and there's a picture of cycloped. It looks extraordinary. We learn how to withdraw when the horse fell through the floor of the structure, so clearly braking is something that ruled you out of the trials. We learned that rocket completed the trials without damage, so it proved its reliability. It reached for the time, remarkable speed of 30 miles an hour while towing a weight of 13 tons behind it. Okay. Towing a weight, speed, its reliability, managed to complete the trials without damage. So nowhere here does it say, I'll save you the effort of reading on, nowhere here does it say they were looking for this. What's most important? Okay, so back onto the question. So, was it designed to test speed? Well, it talks about the speed of rocket being really important. It says speed was remarkable for the time. So that does seem to have been something that it was testing. I'm ticking here to show things that are right in the passage, not that it's a correct answer to this question, if that makes sense. Elegance. Reliability. Well, it says, line 46, thereby proving its reliability. I think they were looking for that. Usefulness. It's a bit vague. Let's leave that. Towing power. It was rocket managed to complete it while towing a weight of 13 tons behind it. So they were recording exactly what weight it could tow. So they pretty much definitely were testing for that. Towing power. We're left with elegance and usefulness. Well, look, nowhere in there does it say they wanted to see what was most useful. But that's obvious. All of these things are about usefulness. Its speed, its ability to tow things, its tendency not to break into lots of bits. These are all usefulness. Of course they were testing for usefulness. Use your brain. Just because the word useful isn't in there, I think, does not mean that this is not also supported by the passage. Look, clearly the thing they weren't testing for, at least according to the text, and note the question says, so far as you can tell from the passage, they weren't testing for elegance. There is no evidence in the test that they wanted the most beautiful locomotive. They might have done, but it does not give us any clues that that was the case. So the answer is elegance, because the trial was not designed to test for elegance. Right, give me a second, please. I'm just going to turn the fan on before I keel over. It's very hot and stuffy in here. Oh. That's better. I feel my life returning. Onwards to cycloped. That's the problem with doing this. I've got lights around shining on me from different angles because I'm so terribly vain. And they heat up the room horrendously as these lessons go on. What was cycloped? Well, cycloped is discussed in this section here. Cycloped, a locomotive built around a horse on a treadmill. And we've even got a picture of cycloped here. Quite extraordinary. So you can see the horse walks along on a belt, a treadmill. I'm sure you know what a treadmill is. And that goes round and round because the horse is walking on it, and that turns the wheels. I mean, it just seems an absolutely, completely bonkers idea. But I think it's wonderful that we live in a world where people have ideas like this and actually think that they might lead to something, because sometimes it's the bonkers ideas that do. In this case, it didn't, because the horse fell through the floor, and I hope it didn't hurt itself too badly, and cycloped was not chosen. Anyway, back to the questions. What was cycloped? Oh, look, it was a locomotive built by a horse. No. Look, it's clearly a locomotive powered by a horse. Obviously, a locomotive designed for horses to fall through. I think this was the easy question, designed to give you an easy mark. But there were also lots of tricks there if you just jump at the word horse. Use your noggin. Anyway, locomotive powered by a horse. Option C. Easy peasy. I'm not going to check all the other ones. Come on, this is just insanely obvious. Why does the passage say that it is difficult to understand why the cycloped design did not become popular with railway owners? Option A, it's a joke. Option B, because the design was excellent. One unfortunate accident shouldn't have been enough to dismiss a promising invention. Horses are much more attractive than steam locomotives. Because it could pull 13 tons at 30 miles an hour. I think we know where this one's going, but always check the passage. For reasons which are difficult to understand, this also should say that and not which. My English. For reasons that are difficult to understand, the design never took off. Well, we know that cycloped was this bizarre design, and then we know that the horse fell through it and it broke spectacularly in the middle of the trials. There is no evidence that there was anything whatsoever good about this design. If the author has said it's hard to understand why the design never took off, then either the author is joking or the author is an idiot. I shouldn't say idiot, it might undermine the author's self-esteem, but I don't know whether Locke and Techningsbach is watching this. Probably not. Okay, so the author is, look, it's clearly joking, and the other options are just all clearly wrong. And there's no more to say. Quickly, your comments, in case I'm missing something fascinating. No, you're mostly just being rude to Josh. Don't be rude to Josh. It's not his fault that he has to post the same answer 20 gazillion times in a row. It's just the way he is. Okay, on to question 9. Why does the passage add the phrase "for the time," line 47? Well, this isn't obvious, so we need to go back into passage and find out where and how this is used. It reached the "for the time" remarkable speed of 30 miles an hour. Okay, so let's just stop and think about this. Is 30 miles an hour a remarkable speed for a locomotive? Well, if you were travelling the length of the United Kingdom at 30 miles an hour, how long is the United Kingdom? Goodness me. I don't actually know the answer to that. I would say maybe it's something like, I don't know, maybe you know, maybe it's something like 400 miles. Anyway, that being the case, it would take more than 13 hours to do it at that speed. This is a slow train. It is not a remarkable speed by our standards for trains. But for the time, it was remarkable. So what does remarkable mean? What does for the time mean? It means bearing in mind the technology they had at that point, it was a pretty impressive speed. Okay, back into the answers. Let's see whether an answer matches that. This isn't a performance which would seem special now. There should be that as well. Goodness me. This is the performance that would seem special now. B, look, that's almost certainly the answer. However, so I shouldn't be filling the box in. Bad. I should be ticking it until I've checked the others. It was only designed for use during its own lifetime. Well, that may sound good, but think about what it means. It means the locomotive could only be used while it was a locomotive. I mean, duh. That's a statement of the obvious, but it has nothing to do with the phrase "for the time." No. It was an impressive speed to achieve in such a limited time. Well, if you didn't know the phrase "for the time" and know what it meant, that could be a bit tempting. But we don't know anything about the time it had to run at, unless we're saying it only had 2 minutes and didn't have time to get up to speed. But then why would you test the locomotive without giving it time to get up to speed? It just doesn't really stack up. The locomotive achieved the fastest time of all the others there. Well, for the time just doesn't mean compared to others. It just doesn't mean that. Because Rocket was so reliable, doesn't really have anything to do with that either. That's a different part of the passage. It talks about its reliability. Look, it's just clearly option B. You might be tempted by C, but it just doesn't work nearly as well. And what does this in such a limited time actually mean? What's it getting at? Did they not have enough time in the trial? There's no evidence for that. It's just a bit weird. B is just really clear. Question 10. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'm going to wrap this up pretty soon actually, because I don't want to be going on with these indefinitely. Let's do question 10, and then maybe we'll come back and do a few more on another occasion. The Josh debate going on. Be nice to Josh, people. He really didn't do anything very bad. He just posted his answers lots of time. That's enthusiasm. I like enthusiasm. Just, be nice. There's enough nastiness in the world. Which of the following statements about the railway company's requirements is most accurate? I know no one's really being nasty. If you were, I wouldn't be so nice about it. They wanted locomotives with multiple fire tubes, a blast pipe and front wheel drive. Ooh, technical. They wanted locomotives designed with heavy freight particularly in mind. They only cared about passenger trains. Their railway was supposed to be capable of carrying passenger carriages and freight. They were only interested in coal and passengers. Goodness me, right, this is looking a bit complicated. Let's look at the text and just see what we can find about the railway company's requirements. Because the railway management were more focused on passenger transport than on heavy freight, the winning locomotive was required to be fast and reliable, but it was not expected to be able to tow enormous loads. Okay, so that seems relevant. Let's go back to the answer options and see what matches. So they wanted locomotives with multiple fire tubes, a blast pipe and front wheel drive. That's not in this section we just looked at, so we just have to reconsider that in a second. Oh, by the way, most accurate, there's no not in there. Very important. They wanted locomotives designed with heavy freight particularly in mind. Okay, let's go back to the passage. So we can see that they were more focused on passenger transport than on heavy freight. So really the opposite here. They weren't so focused on heavy freight. They only cared about passenger trains. They did care a lot more about passenger trains, only. Come back to that. Their railway was supposed to be capable of carrying passenger carriages and freight. Okay, maybe. They were only interested in coal and passengers. Where does coal come into this? Need to check the passage again. There's only one mention of coal in this. That they were not expected to be able to tow enormous loads such as trains of coal trucks. So coal is something that they were not particularly expected to be able to tow. So this option about being interested in coal, that seems to be something that they weren't really interested in. Okay, let's check the fire tubes, blast pipe and front wheel drive thing again quickly. Where's that mentioned in the passage? We've got to see if we can rule this out. Well, we know from all this stuff here that they were considering all kinds of options, including something with a horse on a cart. Now, if they'd required blast pipes and multiple fire tubes and front wheel drive, then how on earth would this thing have been able even to take part in the competition? So that just doesn't really match up. And then you'll see, if you read on, and you will have read on, of course, before answering the questions if you were doing this really, you'd see that these are all ideas that Stephenson came up with for his locomotive, not things that the railway company required. So I'm going to save you looking through all that right now, because in real life you'd already read it, to say that they just didn't require this stuff. These are things that Stephenson used to make a locomotive that did meet their requirements, but they weren't things that the company said in advance must be part of one of their locomotives. So we're left with C and D. They only cared about passenger trains. Their railway was supposed to be capable of carrying passenger carriages and freight. This is a really tricky one. That's a good question to finish on, because it's going to take a bit of thought. The railway management were more focused on passenger transport than on heavy freight. Okay, so we know that they were much more interested in passengers. But did they only care about passenger trains? Well, more focused doesn't sound like only to me. Okay. Oh, Yusuf, let's write nothing in the chat for a while, please, and listen to the teacher. Star student of today. Look, you can just ignore the chat if you don't want to pay attention to it anyway. I like that very much. It makes me feel very important. So anyway, more focused on passenger transport than heavy freight doesn't mean only passenger transport. It was required to be fast and reliable, but was not expected to be able to tow enormous loads. That does not mean that it wasn't expected to tow any loads. We know they were more focused on passengers, but not only. And we know that the locomotive didn't have to be able to tow enormous loads of heavy things. Neither of those bits of information tells us that they only cared about passenger trains. And in fact, the way that the word language is used, more focused, not expected to tow enormous loads, actually, if you read between the lines, pretty much tells us that the locomotive would be expected to pull some loads. Why does it tell us that? Because if its job was just to tow passengers, then the text would say that, rather than all this careful idly-fiddly wording. So, although we perhaps cannot 100% be certain that D and not C is correct, you are asked to choose the most accurate answer, not the only possibility. And I think we can say that D is 95% certain and C is like a 5% option. And that means we are surely going to choose option D. This is a really likely question to get wrong. If you've made one mistake in this paper, I reckon it's pretty likely to be this one. But very well done if you got it right. Josh says, what's idly fiddly? Idly fiddly is a phrase that I just made up, and I hope it dies as quickly as it was born, because it isn't a very good phrase. It certainly isn't very academic and sophisticated and so on. Right. Okay. Great. So I'm going to call a day on the comprehension part of this lesson there, because I think that's quite enough for you to focus on. We've covered a lot of skills. The more detailed discussion of when you read the passage, whether you should read the questions first, that kind of thing, go back to my very first Easy 11 Plus lesson on multiple choice comprehension, where I talk about these things in a lot of detail, and there'll be more of that there. I don't want to get bogged down anymore in comprehension for today. I'll either do more of these questions in next week's lesson, or I'll do a short video or two on it covering the rest. I'll decide in the meantime. As I mentioned before, sign up for the free videos and papers linked in the video description. You'll go onto my mailing list, and then you'll get my emails telling you what I'm doing with these lessons, sending you the worksheets and so on. Deep breath. Don't forget to breathe when talking. Right. I think it's time to speed on to the So this week's tip of the week is something I say all the time in emails to parents who are worrying about their children's progress, but it's just as relevant whether you're a parent or whether you're a student, and it is that you shouldn't get too bogged down with measuring your marks. And that may sound mad, because you may say, but hang on a sec, what are we doing if not preparing to get really good marks in exams? Well, that's true, but the way to get good marks in the end is not always to focus on marks as you're practicing. Look, sometimes a paper is harder and sometimes a paper is easier. If you do an easy paper this week and a hard one next week and you get a lower mark, does that mean you've got less good? Of course it doesn't. Also, learning is not like this. You don't just get better evenly over time. Sometimes you get better a bit better, then you slip back a bit, then you get better again, then you level out for a bit, then you get better again, then you fall back, whatever it might be. That's how learning works. And there's just no point getting down on yourself and frustrated if your marks fall off a bit. Just don't worry excessively about marks. What you need to focus on is your skills. And no, Jeremiah, I'm not on Wednesdays now. It's because the football was last night. It's just one off this week. I'm on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock almost every week. Anyway, saying marks, yeah. Don't obsess about football, obsess about marks. Don't obsess about marks, obsess about skills. So if there's a place where you've been losing marks in a paper, work out what you were doing wrong, what the skills are that you need to work on, and then next time you encounter a question like that, say to yourself, have my skills improved? And that's what matters. Focus on skills, write down the areas where you need to develop, keep checking back at those lists that you've written down and see whether you're getting better at those things. Do not obsess about marks. Yes, at the beginning your marks might in general be lower. Yes, 6 months later it might be worth comparing your normal sort of marks now to your normal sort of marks then, but that's different. Don't worry about saying, I have to get 5% more in my next paper. Life isn't like that. Calm down, don't stress. Work on the skills. Okay, and now, last section, as every week, we're going to look at a few of Okay, Shahil says, should we read the comprehension first? I think you mean, should you read the passage first? I apologise if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that's what you mean. And the answer is yes, definitely. The first thing you need to do is read the instructions at the top of the exam paper. Okay, that goes without saying, but it's super important, and underline any important things in the instructions that aren't completely obvious to you. The second thing you do is you read the text, and you read the text thoroughly enough that you understand who the characters are, if it's a work of fiction, what's going on basically, but also, and this is really important for this kind of comprehension, you read it to understand where each topic, each area is covered in the text, so that when you have a question, you know to look back at that bit. So for example, if you've got a question mentioning the parts of a locomotive, like the firebox or whatever, you know, this is the bit where they were talking about the parts of a locomotive, but there's also that other bit about it on the next page, which I may need to look at and I mustn't forget about. So, for example, that kind of thing is really important. What you don't need to do is read really slowly and take notes about every little thing. That would be lovely if you could. You probably don't have time in an exam. What I would not usually recommend is reading all the questions at the beginning of the exam as well. It would be lovely if you could. It is a useful thing to do. You probably don't have time. Read the passage, get a good overall understanding, and then look at the questions as they come. Why is everyone asking about Wednesdays? The lessons are not on Wednesdays. It's on Wednesday because of the football yesterday. That was a satisfying match to watch. Although I apologise to any German supporters here. Not really. Not apologising for anything. No, these lessons are on Tuesday evenings at 6 o'clock. And of course, you can watch them again at any time on the Easy 11 Plus channel, along with all my other videos, blah, blah, blah. Advert. They are not normally on Wednesdays. Deep breath, Robert. Okay, if anyone else asks me about Wednesdays, I'll probably explode, which now means everyone's going to do it. Should we do the questions first? That seems to mean, should you do the questions before you've read the passage? Difficult one. No, don't do that. Read the passage first, do the questions after you've read the passage. Maybe you meant something else. I'm sorry, I shouldn't make fun, but that amuses me. Monsbat says, why did you circle most? I can't remember. How many times must I answer this question? I circled most. Let's go back to this. Here's an example. Look, here I've circled most. Well, because we want the one that's most accurate and not the one that's least accurate, okay? Some questions say which of these is not right, which of these is least accurate, and that's the opposite way round. And you always need to know whether the question is a find the right answer question or a find the wrong answer question. And it's so easy to misread the question and do it the wrong way around and make a complete pig's ear of it and waste a load of time. And that's why you should always underline or circle keywords like most or not. Okay, I hope that's nice and clear. He's probably going to ask it again now just to wind me up. Oh, someone says, sorry, they meant before the class. Should we look at the questions before the class? I do apologise. I completely misunderstood. I think it's always a really good thing if you can print out the worksheet and have a go at the questions before you watch one of my lessons, whether it's a live lesson or whether it's a lesson that you're going back to watch, because then you'll already have gone through the thought processes that I'm going through as I explain the questions, and then you can compare what I'm doing to what you did when you did the questions. So yeah, absolutely, I would definitely encourage you to do the questions before the lesson, and that's why I say it's a really good idea if you can sign up to my mailing list, because then you'll get the worksheet. Normally what happens is lessons on a Tuesday, I send out the questions on the Friday or the Saturday, so you get a few days to do them before the lesson, and that way you'll get more out of the lesson. I do apologise for misunderstanding you. Sanjay just winding me up by asking me the Wednesday thing. Yes, you win. Good joke. I'm not doing Wednesdays, I'm doing Tuesdays. How can we read faster? That's a really good question. There are lots of techniques for reading faster, and if you Google it, you'll find various things. When I was a teenager, I put quite a lot of effort into trying to learn to read books super fast and remember the information from it. I just gave up on it. It was a complete waste of time, because the point of reading is not to read really fast, it's to read and to understand. If you're a relatively slow reader, that is not necessarily a problem. It often means you're reading more carefully. If you have an exam passage to read and you're worried about the speed, just try and make sure that you don't get too bogged down. That's probably the main thing. Make sure that there aren't points where you get stuck and you just end up staring at the page and maybe overthinking. Think, what am I doing? My purpose when I first read the text is to understand the characters, the situation, what's basically going on, if it's worth of fiction, what are the main ideas, where are the main things in the passage. Your job is not to understand every little detail on your first read through. You'll get a chance to go into that much detail when you're answering the questions and you go back to the passage for each one. So just keep steady and consistent. Don't worry if you're too fast, too slow. If you read consistently and don't get bogged down in too much detail, then you'll get through in a reasonable length of time, I think. If your reading is really slow, and that's a serious problem, then maybe you need a little bit of support to work on some reading techniques or something like that, and perhaps there's a teacher at your school who's deals with these kinds of things who might be able to give you some advice, and that isn't really my area of expertise, and I don't want to tread into those areas and say things that are wrong, but that won't be the case for most people. Can we read the questions then read the passage? I would advise reading the passage first. First of all, as I've said, I don't think you have time in the exam to read the passage and the questions before answering the questions. I think you just read the passage and then come to the questions as you come to them. Second thing to say, if you read the questions before you read the passage, you probably won't know what most of the questions are even about, because you don't have the passage to give you context. So I would not recommend that. There are different techniques, but my starting advice would be read the advice at the top of the exam, then read the text. What happens after that? Debatable, but I would definitely start in that order. Do we do science in 11 plus? Great question. No, not generally. Sometimes there's quite often some science tested at 13 plus if you're trying to get into, for example, there are quite often boarding schools that take people starting in year 9 who do the 13 plus exam, and they do often test science. There are a few schools, as far as I know, just independent schools, who set a kind of general paper at 11 plus where you have to play with some kind of scientific ideas, but they don't expect you to know science. They're just testing your ability to read scientific information and do something intelligent with it. St Paul's Girls' School is an example of a school that often sets what they call a general paper, which includes some stuff like that. But that's a very long-winded way of saying, basically, in almost every case, no, you do not need science for 11 plus. That does not mean that scientific knowledge is not important. It's really important, and it will make such a difference to your understanding of the world, but it may not make much difference to your understanding, to your ability to do well in an 11 plus exam. But 11 plus exams are not the most important thing. I'm going to wrap up soon because I think you've earned it. Maybe one more passage. Jeremiah says, do you know Christ Hospital? I most certainly do know Christ Hospital. I was a pupil at Christ Hospital, and then I was a teacher at Christ Hospital after university, so I know Christ Hospital. extremely well, and I think it's a really wonderful place. So yes, I do. That's not really a relevant question though to helping people with 11 plus. Could you read the passage and the text at the same time? Passage and text mean the same thing, so most definitely you could. Should I buy your books? Absolutely. Buy every single one of my books, preferably 10 times. That's really sound advice. Well, it's worth a try. All right, thank you so much for tuning in for today's lesson despite the rescheduling. I hope you found it very useful. Please like and click subscribe. Please tell all your friends and your enemies about these lessons. Don't forget to read all the fascinating links in the video description. I put them there for a reason. Well, lots of reasons, probably to make you buy things, but no, there's a lot of free stuff there and a lot of things which I hope are useful without you needing to stick any money into it. And yeah, hope to see you next Tuesday, people, not Wednesday, at 6 o'clock. Bye-bye. It's been a pleasure, as always.